King David, a larger-than-life biblical figure, perhaps best remembered as one of the most beloved kings of history. Yet upon closer examination, his own existence would reveal very human passions, triumphs, even failures.
If David were alive today, we'd have to make a nighttime soap opera out of him. He would be Godfather-like. He's ruthless. He's a manipulator of people. Everyone who loved him eventually suffered for it.
I don't think that the English language has a word capable of adequately describing the level of David's ambition.
The story of David and Goliath is a saga of what it means to live during a time of great turbulence and to profoundly experience the fullness of one's life.
He leaps off the page. He's real. He sins, he triumphs, he cries, he's overjoyed, he loves, he rejects, and he is rejected. In some ways, David is every man.
Who was this reclusive shepherd boy? A player of music and writer of psalms who went on to slay a giant called Goliath, and then to unite and rule all Israel for 40 years. Ancient Israel, 1,000 years before Christ would be born into these Judean hills. According to the Bible, it is now that another shepherd boy is born. His name is David, the son of Jesse, a farmer from Bethlehem. It is an uneasy time for the Israelites. They are locked in conflict with their warring neighbors, the Philistines, and desperately need a strong leader. The Bible tells us that it is through a judge and prophet named Samuel that God communicates with the people and answers their need. Samuel is sent on the holy mission of selecting a new king. He knows only that the future monarch is to come from one of the 8 sons of Jesse the farmer, favored by God for his pious lifestyle. Samuel summons Jesse and his sons to come before him, but curiously, one of them is absent.
David isn't even presented to him on the first go-round. God actually has to quote a proverb at Samuel, which is a very folksy thing for the Lord of the universe to do, and to say, listen, don't keep looking at these handsome, tall boys, because human beings look on the externals, but the Lord looks on the heart. Samuel finally gets the message and says to Jesse, isn't there another one? And Jesse says, yes, well, there's the youngest one who's out with the sheep.
As the youngest of 8 sons, David receives little attention from his family. His childhood days are spent alone in the desert tending his father's sheep.
His work as a shepherd teaches him independence, teaches him how to care for a flock, and teaches him that though he may be small, with his superior knowledge and his intuitive wit and his love of God, he can be stronger than the strongest wolf or lion or bear who comes up to threaten his flock.
Tending his father's sheep, the young boy David develops more than physical strength. Isolation makes him introspective, a poet, and according to tradition, a writer of psalms.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Psalm 23:4.
David is called by his father to appear before Samuel. When he sees David, Samuel instinctively knows that this humble young boy, still shy of his teens, is indeed God's chosen king.
In the Bible, God falls in love with certain characters, and we never truly know why. And there is something about David, something about his vitality, his poetry, his music, that captures the hearts of human beings, and perhaps we can say captured the heart of God.
So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. and the Spirit of God rushed upon David from that day forward. 1 Samuel 16:13.
And so the shepherd boy is chosen as the future ruler of Israel. But the throne is already occupied by Israel's first king, Saul. Aware that he has fallen into disfavor with God, Saul becomes melancholy. He hears of the boy David, known throughout the land for his skills as a poet and musician, and sends for him to come to the palace to play his lyre. Saul welcomes him at court, not knowing that David has been selected to succeed him on the throne one day.
Perhaps the fact that David was the 8th son and not favored by his father leads him to look to Saul as a sort of surrogate father, to want to curry favor with Saul and to be especially pleasing to Saul.
David's music and words soothe the king, but David will not enjoy the comfort of the royal court for long. Once again, Israel's implacable enemy, the Philistines, challenge the nation in battle. Though David is too young to fight, his 3 older brothers are soldiers in King Saul's army, and his father sends him to take food to them. David arrives at the battlefront, here at the Valley of Elah, to find the Philistines and the Israelites locked in the 40th day of a standoff. David's attention is caught by a fierce warrior who emerges from the Philistine ranks. Dressed in armor, he is a giant of a man. His name has come down through history, for he is the one known as Goliath. The Bible tells us very little about this warrior.
Goliath was this huge Philistine warrior, must have weighed 400 pounds, could have played middle linebacker for the Bears. The text says he was 9 feet tall. Must have been a tremendously imposing figure for a young shepherd to take on.
Goliath begins to taunt the Israelites, defiantly calling for a duel, a one-on-one contest, striking terror into the Israelite warriors. But the young David resolves to take up the challenge, invoking God as the source of his strength.
Who is that uncircumcised fellow, that he should defy the ranks of the living God? God, who protected me from the lion and the bear, will protect me from that Philistine. 1 Samuel 17:36.
He was also a very ambitious young man. And we can imagine that he was driven to kill Goliath not only because he wanted to defend the pride of Israel, but because he wanted the attention of the king and the people.
Unable to wear protective armor, David sets out to challenge Goliath. He is armed only with the simplest of weapons, a slingshot, a handful of stones, and the courage of one who believes in his own destiny. Soon the 2 adversaries will confront each other and forever alter the course of history. Beneath the scorching noonday sun, David and Goliath face one another across the Valley of Elah. As King Saul and all Israel look on, the young shepherd approaches the taunting and towering Philistine. Goliath is insulted that the Israelites have sent a mere youth to oppose him. But David warns Goliath not to underestimate him.
And David said, "All those assembled here will know that it is not by sword or spear that God gives victory. For the battle is God's, and he will hand you over to me." 1 Samuel 17:45.
David hurls a stone at the giant's forehead. As it sinks in, Goliath falls to the ground, dead. A proclaimed hero, David returns to the palace. He delivers Goliath's head to King Saul.
The story of Goliath really makes David's reputation as a warrior and begins the chain of events which unravels his relationship with Saul. When the troops would come back from battle, And Saul the king, the leader, would have to hear the crowds extolling David's praises at a much higher level than Saul's. It must have killed him.
Although Saul places the young David in charge of his soldiers, he grows jealous of David's growing popularity and his love for Saul's son, Jonathan. Scholars believe David and Jonathan may have had an intimate relationship.
I think historically we'd have to say it is not an impossibility that there was a homosexual relationship between David and Jonathan. However, given the other biblical material that suggests a very harsh ancient Israelite attitude towards homosexuality, it makes the relationship somewhat more unlikely.
Jonathan is not the last member of Saul's family who will devote himself to David. Now Michal, Saul's beautiful daughter, declares to her father that she is in love with David. King Saul sees this as a welcome opportunity. He offers Michal as a wife to David, on condition that as a bride price, David kill 100 Philistines. Saul's hope, however, is that David will fall into the hands of the enemy and be killed. But David also sees this as an opportunity, a way to move one step closer to the throne.
She's the king's daughter whom David marries in order to make room for himself at the top. They have different agenda. She's interested in him for interpersonal, for love. He's interested in a career move.
Contrary to Saul's expectation, David successfully slays 100 Philistines. Now the king must hand Michal over to him as his wife. As polygamy is an accepted practice at this time, Michal becomes the first of many wives David will take. Thus, Saul's secret hatred for David relentlessly intensifies. There is but one solution. David must be killed. One day, when David is near, Saul hurls a spear at him. David escapes with his life. Not knowing where to hide from Saul's wrath, David goes to the one person he knows will offer him safe refuge, Jonathan. But even there he is not safe from Saul, who is intent on hunting him down. David painfully parts from his friend. Accompanied by 400 supporters, David seeks refuge in the wilderness. There his men become a formidable fighting force. But Saul and his army are never far behind. One day, Saul unknowingly ends up within arm's distance of his prey. Here, near the waterfalls of En-Gedi, David and his men have taken refuge inside a cave when Saul enters to relieve himself. This is David's chance to destroy his pursuer. But instead, he secretly cuts off a piece of the king's robe.
David was clever enough to know that the one way that he would inherit the kingship securely is if he had no responsibility for the death of Saul. So even though he would not kill Saul out of conscience, I think he also would not kill Saul out of prudence.
When Saul exits, David calls to him, holding up the fragment of the king's robe.
And David said to Saul, "This very day you have seen that although God delivered you into my power in the cave, I refused to slay you and looked on you with compassion. I said, I shall not raise my hand against my Lord, for he is God's anointed." 1 Samuel 24:11.
Stunned by David's mercy, Saul pledges to end the pursuit. But David knows that the king is not to be trusted. David and his entourage desperately seek a safe place to hide. Ironically, David's best refuge turns out to be among his earlier enemy, the Philistines. At Gath, birthplace of Goliath, he takes up residence.
David wanted to be king, but knew that his only chance to escape Saul's obsessive desire to do him in was to become, for a while, a traitor.
David finds favor with the Philistine rulers, and for over a year, he fights on their side against other neighboring tribes. But the day finally comes for the Philistines to once again do battle against the Israelites. David is confronted by a painful dilemma. Does he take up arms against his own people, or does he leave this safe refuge? Before he can decide, David is rejected by the Philistine military leaders.
They don't trust David. And so David isn't faced with that tragic moral choice. Do I go to war against Saul? Had he been confronted with that, I'm not entirely sure that David would have taken the noble path in that, and it may have been the easy way of removing the threat and advancing his career rather quickly.
The Philistines clash with King Saul and his army on Mount Gilboa. David does not participate, perhaps fortunately, for it is in this vicious battle that both King Saul and his son Jonathan, David's beloved friend, lose their lives.
Certainly, David couldn't be sorry that the way was now clear for him to become king of Israel. Jonathan's death was another matter. Jonathan's love for David and David's love for Jonathan was legendary and real. I think the loss of Jonathan was something that David never could get over.
I grieve for you, my brother. You were so dear to me. Your love was wonderful to me, more than the love of a woman. 2 Samuel 1:25.
With King Saul gone, the path to the throne is now open. David can finally begin to fulfill his destiny. King Saul and his son Jonathan are dead, killed in battle against the Philistines. Though grief-stricken by the loss of his loyal friend Jonathan, David's sights are now firmly fixed on Saul's throne of Israel. But unforeseen obstacles still remain. According to the Bible, David is instructed by God to go to Hebron, the nation's capital in the south. There he is anointed king. But among the tribes of the north, another king has assumed the throne. His name is Ishbaal, King Saul's only living son. David will stop at nothing to unite his people and become king of all Israel. So the once slayer of Israel's enemies gathers his army and now goes to war against his fellow Israelites. Soon his troops gain the upper hand in the conflict.
What made David so charismatic? It's hard to say. He had so many abilities, he seemed to have such confidence, he seemed to know what he was doing, that people were willing to follow him anywhere.
As Ishbaal's camp weakens, his military general Abner sends a message to David offering a peace pact and pledging to deliver all Israel to him. David meets the general on one condition. Michal, the wife he left behind after fleeing Saul's court, must be returned to him. This will finally cement his connection with the northern royal house of Israel. But Michal has remarried.
It represents David's calculating side, marrying her as a tactic to position himself, paying no attention to her as long as he was running loose and free.
Michal is returned to David, but before General Abner can deliver Israel into David's hands, he is murdered. With Abner gone, Saul's son Ishbaal is the only man standing in the way of David uniting all Israel. Then one night, Ishbaal is murdered in his sleep by his military commanders. His head is delivered to David. Surprisingly, David seems furious about the killing and has Ishbaal's commanders executed. Scholars have long questioned whether David had anything to do with the slayings of Abner and Ishbaal.
David is a very clever politician. He's able to sort of cover his tracks in a way. And yet the irony about all of this is that the biblical writers seem to be suggesting to us that they know very well David was involved in this. By never actually saying, of course David was involved in this, yells at us loudly that of course David was involved in this.
David reigns from Hebron for 7 years. During this time, 6 sons are born to him. Sons who in the years ahead will compete to succeed their father to the throne. But for the moment, all obstacles have been cleared, and the 30-year-old David is anointed king over a united Israel. David now decides to establish a central capital from which to rule. He sets his sights on a place called Jerusalem, a small yet well-defended fortress, strategically located midway between the north and the south of his kingdom. But the city's inhabitants, the Jebusites, are unwilling to lose their home to David, who will settle for nothing short of total submission. He leads an armed expedition and invades Jerusalem. After a short but bloody battle, the city ceremoniously becomes known as the City of David. Although David is now king over all Israel, he believes that his reign will not know peace until the Ark of the Covenant is given a place of importance among his people. The Ark is the sacred object that contains the 10 Commandments, brought down from Mount Sinai by Moses during the Exodus from Egypt. It has been safely kept at a small village for over a century. David brings the Ark to Jerusalem.
This is a wonderful political move on David's part because it now associates his new kingship and his new capital, Jerusalem, with a former tribal religious article. Hence, he legitimates himself through bringing the Ark to Jerusalem.
David personally leads the procession escorting the Ark into Jerusalem. Dressed in a simple loincloth, he dances and sings ecstatically to celebrate its arrival. But Michal, his wife, does not share in her husband's jubilation. She is disgusted by David's behavior and accuses him of publicly flaunting himself.
This is quintessentially David. Even in his moments of public display, he is an ecstatic. He is beloved of the people, and he has this deep connection to God that allows him to express it in song and dance.
Wounded by Michal's criticism, David shuns her from this day onwards. She will remain alone and childless for the rest of her life. With the Ark now safely in Jerusalem, King David has reached the pinnacle of his reign. Holding on to his power may prove more difficult than attaining it, as the king succumbs to dangerous liaisons and illicit affairs of the heart. It is approximately the year 960 before the Common Era. Though war with the Philistines continues to rage along the outer reaches of the kingdom, Jerusalem itself is a calm and settled place. A now middle-aged King David has not known such inner peace since tending his father's sheep as a boy in the desert. One day, while standing on the balcony of his palace, he spots a lonely figure on a nearby rooftop. It is a woman bathing in the nude. David is enraptured by her beauty and demands that she be brought to him. Her name is Bathsheba.
Upon seeing Bathsheba, David is struck, I believe, by the congenital problem of kings, which is you can have so much, you can't believe there is anything in the world that you really want and aren't allowed to have.
David is told that Bathsheba is the wife of a man named Uriah, a loyal soldier in his army. Still, he insists that Bathsheba be brought to him. When she arrives, he is overcome by lust and seduces her.
As far as we can tell, Bathsheba never seduces David. It's not a matter of her deliberately being on the roof. He is not supposed to be there. The text is very clear. It says, it was the time when kings go forth to do battle, and David sits in Jerusalem. It's a man out of place, possibly bored, possibly tired of fighting the same battles over and over again, and he sees a beautiful woman, he wants her, he sends for her, and he beds her. And in doing so, he violates all the ties he has had with his army, with his nation, with his God.
David soon learns that Bathsheba is pregnant and immediately attempts to conceal the matter. He sends for Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, to return home from battle and orders him to sleep with his wife. But Uriah feels it is morally wrong for him to engage in sexual relations with his wife while his fellow soldiers are engaged in battle. Instead, he remains within the palace. By not going home to his wife, Uriah has unwittingly signed his own death warrant. Desperate to conceal his own role in Bathsheba's pregnancy, David sends Uriah back into battle, carrying a letter that will seal his fate.
When David sends Uriah to the front to be killed, he puts the note in Uriah's own hand that says, be sure and put this guy in the front lines. Can you imagine the cynicism and calculation of somebody who not only finds his lover's husband to death, but gives him the note that ensures it'll happen?
Uriah is killed in action. Bathsheba mourns the death of her fallen husband. Soon, however, David marries her, and she bears him a son. But in God's eyes, David has committed a grave mortal sin. Nathan the prophet is sent to court to confront the king. He presents David with a challenging legal case and asks the king to pass judgment. Little does David know he is actually judging himself.
And Nathan comes and tells this fascinating little story, and David is just enraged at this story that Nathan says, and David demands, I demand to know who this one is so that I may punish him. And there's almost this dramatic silence as Nathan turns to the king and points to him and says, Atah ish, you are the man. David is confronted with his own evil by this messenger of God.
Nathan speaks for God and informs King David that he will be punished for his transgressions.
This is what God has said. I'm going to stir up trouble for you out of your own house. I'm going to take your wives before your very eyes and give them to someone else. For though you acted secret, I shall do this thing in front of all Israel. 2 Samuel 12:11.
David humbly admits that he has sinned against God. But Nathan informs him that it is not he who will pay, but rather the child born of his relationship with Bathsheba.
It is one sign of David's moral greatness that when Nathan comes to him and says, you're the man who sinned, instead of doing what any other king at the time would have done, which is to say, kill this prophet, David says, you are right, and I repent before the people and before God. David was powerful, and at times he was ruthless, but he never lost his consciousness of being a human being and even a sinner.
As foretold by Nathan, the child born of David's illicit affair with Bathsheba becomes gravely ill. A grief-stricken David spends his days and nights in prayer, but on the seventh day, the child dies. Though deeply anguished, David accepts God's will and comforts Bathsheba. Passions between the two lovers are stirred, and it is not long before she becomes pregnant again, bearing yet another son. This time the child is healthy and thrives. The couple name him Solomon.
A child is always a blessing in the ancient world. They would never have understood our world at all in terms of how we treat our children. So when Solomon is born after the loss of Bathsheba's first child, David must truly feel that this is a gift from God. And Solomon is going to be, like David, the one.
But as Nathan the prophet foretold, David's suffering as a father is far from over. Soon his firstborn son, Amnon, falls obsessively in love with Tamar, one of David's daughters. Making matters worse, Amnon rapes her. King David learns what has happened, but out of compassion for his son, he does not punish him. Tamar's brother, Absalom, is enraged by what has happened and is especially angry at his father's lack of action in the matter.
David's unresponsiveness to the rape of his daughter by his son Amnon shows us the beginning of David's inability to deal with the multiple commitments to the throne and to his family.
So Absalom, unable to forgive Amnon, invites him to a banquet. Then, in plain view of everyone present, he has his brother murdered.
Absalom felt that the crime was never avenged. He took matters into his own hands, killed his brother Amnon, and made the situation worse. Had David, as a father or as a king, or both taken decisive action, the tragedy might have been averted.
David is devastated to learn that his beloved firstborn son is dead.
It seems a very dysfunctional family, except when we keep in mind that these were all portenders to the throne. So even if David did have such great compassion for these sons, he still is intelligent enough to know that his sons represent a threat to him as well.
2 years pass before King David forgives Absalom. But the peace between them is a tenuous one, for ultimately, Absalom plans to take everything away from his father, including his kingdom and his women. Though the royal household of King David and his family appears peaceful, Absalom has yet to forgive his father for not reacting to the rape of his sister Tamar. In time, he also begins to lose patience with his father, who is slow to name a successor to the throne. So Absalom begins a campaign aimed at securing the throne for himself. Absalom plans to win the hearts of the people. He stands at the palace gate and appeals to those who have come to court for judgment before the king. He assures them that if he were monarch, he would always decide in the people's favor. His popularity soars.
And one of the great ironies is the fact that Absalom acts very much like his father. And in fact, there's a sense in which he out-Davids David for a while in very cleverly offering to the people more rewards if he was the king.
Under the guise of serving God, Absalom goes to Hebron. From there, he spreads rumors throughout Israel that he has assumed the throne and has re-established the nation's capital at Hebron. David is heartbroken to learn of his son's false claims. Because he wants to avoid confrontation with Absalom and perhaps fears for his own life, King David hurriedly flees Jerusalem with all his household, except 10 concubines of his harem, who are left behind. With King David gone, Absalom re-enters Jerusalem and attempts to take all that is his father's.
In the ancient Near East, the way you prove that you're as good a ruler as your daddy was is you sleep with your daddy's wives. So Absalom goes up on the roof of the palace, which is exactly where David saw Bathsheba, because this is all an outworking of David's curse because of what he did to Uriah over Bathsheba. Absalom goes up to the roof and sets up a tent and a couch, and he begins to sleep with all of David's remaining wives and concubines.
Reminiscent of his days fleeing King Saul, David and his army have once again retreated to the wilderness. It is here that Absalom pursues his father, mounting a new offensive. David's men march out to do battle against Absalom, with but one overriding order from the king. Absalom is not to be harmed. A fierce confrontation ensues. Fearfully, David awaits word from the front. His worst fear comes to pass. Absalom is killed in battle by none other than Joab.
In this battle, Joab the general disobeys David the king, because as a general he believes that David the king needs his son dead, that as long as his son is alive, David is in danger, and he himself kills Absalom.
At the news of Absalom's death, King David collapses in grief.
He, who used to be so eloquent when he mourned over the death of Jonathan, is now reduced to repeating over and over again, Absalom, Absalom, my son, Absalom, would that I have died in your stead, Absalom, my son. We see the broken-hearted old king mourning for the son he dearly loves.
A shattered King David uncharacteristically declares a general amnesty, pardoning all who have acted against him. All except the 10 concubines who were seduced by Absalom. They are imprisoned in a cell, where they will remain for the rest of their days. From this day onward, David must use force to hold his kingdom together. Even the Philistines now see King David as vulnerable, and they attack his kingdom. While in battle, the king becomes exhausted and must be rescued by his soldiers from the hands of the enemy. The gallant warrior whose reputation was built on slaying Goliath has grown too old to fight.
He wasn't going to go out to battle anymore because he got too old and they had to rescue him and everybody worried about him, so that he had to stay home in the palace, and then he was uncomfortable, almost like a fighter sitting on his hands.
The once vibrant and potent David is now old and bedridden. He is even unable to keep himself warm. His servants bring a young maiden to lie with him to provide warmth and comfort.
It is in its way a sad scene, but it reminds us of the great human truth that it doesn't matter how powerful, it doesn't matter how able, to every human being there comes that time when you can't be self-sustaining, when you need the warmth, the goodness of others around you.
Though King David is nearing death, he has yet to make the most critical decision of his life. Which one of his sons will succeed him as monarch? Contenders to the throne grow anxious about the issue of succession. One of David's sons, Adonijah, takes matters into his own hands. With support from General Joab, he declares himself the next king. But not everyone at court supports him. Chief among those who oppose him is David's wife, Bathsheba, who desperately wants her own son Solomon to assume the throne. Bathsheba approaches her bedridden husband and tells him that Adonijah has declared himself king. She reminds David of his long-standing promise that their son Solomon will rule. Moved by Bathsheba's plea, David acquiesces. Upon his deathbed, David imparts to Solomon the hope that his son will rule according to God's word. But far from forgiving his enemies, David reminds his son of those who have wronged him over the years. On that list is his once trusted general, Joab.
I think when David got old and the vitality that had defined him drained out of him, it was replaced by a sense of remorse for all that he had seen and done in the course of his long life, because he realized that he had left behind him the wreckage of a family, any number of people hurt, betrayed, and yet, with his very last breaths, what he said to Solomon is, "Don't forget to take revenge."
After reigning over Israel for 40 years, David the king takes his final breath. He is buried in Jerusalem, the city that would be forever a part of his legend. His legacy still echoes throughout the world today.
I don't expect David was any greater or any more evil than any human leader has been throughout human society. I think the man would probably use the language of moral responsibility and of the significance of leadership. I think that we would be impressed with the banality of evil, of the fact that those who are capable of such horrendous acts are people that probably would seem uncomfortably like any of us.
David, as he is depicted in the Bible, is a very complex character. He has a charming side, he has a ruthless side. He knows how to work with the people around him to his own advantage. He knows how to secure and hold the love and loyalty of a variety of people, of men and of women. He is ambitious, but he also has a good sense of timing. And he also has a vulnerable side that comes through that makes him, I think, irresistible 3,000 years later.
Despite his flaws, the greatness of King David transcends his all-too-human weaknesses. Perhaps his immortal legacy is best symbolized by this statue of him, created by Michelangelo in 1501, still on display today in Florence, Italy. For like this monumental work of art, David was himself truly larger than life. He left behind an enduring legacy, a strong and secure Israel over which his son Solomon would rule. King David lives in history, an embodiment of vision, strength, and courage, which continues to inspire the world.